Hey guys, JV here, and this commentary today focuses on constructively criticizing Andromeda. Overall, I've really enjoyed my experience with the game, and in a lot of ways I believe that Andromeda is fantastic. But the game does have flaws, and it's important to be able to talk about them from a place of wanting the game to improve through patches or potential future sequels. And here's the distinction. I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you why the game is hot garbage and why I want EA and BioWare to go down in flames. This interactive medium is very complex, and that's illustrated by the fact that we have very few perfect games, very few games that deserve above an arbitrary 9 out of 10 or whatever number scale you want to go by. Publishers and developers shouldn't be excused for releasing games that are unfinished. I think that is inherently dishonest. But I believe it's equally dishonest to consciously or unconsciously ignore the good parts of these games, focus entirely on what we don't like, and paint this hyperbolic picture of how awful a game is in order to further our opinions, confirm our biases, and continue this constant obsession with outrage. I don't mean to hop on my soapbox here, but we live in a culture of outrage in 2017. It's absolutely true. And it's time that we sit down and have an honest discussion about what we don't like. Heads up, there are no spoilers in this video. I'm about 45 hours into the game, but none of these critiques are of the content of the writing or the story, which I feel are very subjective opinions. Before we begin, quick reminder that you'll find Andromeda tips and tricks guides, commentary, and my 100% completion streamed playthrough here on the channel. If that content interests you, be sure and subscribe. These criticisms are in no particular order, but I believe this first one I'm going to talk about is the biggest general issue for me with my experience playing the game. There are just a large variety of glitches, and I believe it's an issue of polish, and it's not necessarily the severity of glitches. I have read about glitches that have prevented people from advancing in the story, in the main story of the game. I think that's a very big issue. I just haven't run into that myself. But the issue for me with the polish and the glitches is the volume. It's not necessarily the severity, but it's the volume. It's the amount of glitches and how often I encounter them. Before we get into specifics, all of my time with the game is on Xbox One, not PC or PS4. I can't speak to those platforms. So obviously, the first big one in terms of polish is facial animations. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this in the video. I've already explained, obviously, it is an issue, and I don't believe this is fixable, honestly. I don't develop games, I have zero experience, but it just seems like this is such a systemic issue that it's not fixable through a patch to me. Now, there have been former BioWare animators come out and say, they can tell that this system is automated, it is algorithmic in nature, and so maybe there's some tweaking in there where it could be fixed. Maybe, maybe not. But I think we generally agree that facial animations, when you are actually looking at them and when they are pervasive, do take you out of the experience. Now, I've said this before, this doesn't ruin the overall game for me, but I think you are perfectly entitled to say that facial animations, if you like to focus on dialogue, are a make or break for you. But if you do take that position, please also understand that you're missing out on some very good things about the game. The emphasis on exploration, beautiful environments, the combat, on and on. One of the most irritating bugs I had early on in the game was Tempest squad banter before I actually recruited squad mates. So I only had Liam and Cora at the very beginning of the game, but I would hear characters like PB and Drac talking back and forth with my squad mates before they were actually on the ship. That just made no sense. That was clearly a bug, and it really did irritate me to a certain point where I was like, okay, I need to just advance the story because this kept happening. Every hour or so, I'll run into a group of enemies that are just floating in midair, 20 feet up in the air, and they're not normally floating enemies. They're not like Ascendants or anything. They're just floating and unresponsive, and that just seems like a polish issue to me. On my previous streamed playthrough episode, there was a pretty serious scene in terms of story that was missing a character. They were just gone. They were like a ghost. None of their dialogue could be heard, but it was a pre-rendered cutscene. It was predetermined. I couldn't control it, and that really sucked. I had to reload it, and then the cutscene made a lot of sense, but that is just strange, bizarre. And some of the secondary dialogue sequences, and what I mean by that is not the ones that change camera angles and get really close up on faces, not ones that are central to the story, but just, you know, extra information, side quests, all of that. You'll find characters holding objects, and they're not holding it the way they should hold it. I found a Solarian holding a floating cigar in midair. other people messing with their Omni tool, just kind of going crazy, almost look like they have like ADHD or something like that. People holding data pads and they're floating in midair. Just some collision issues. Again, more polishing. In certain spots and specific situations, I will have frame rate drops on Xbox One. Now, the goal for this game is 1080p. It's not 1080 on Xbox One, but that's the goal with 30 FPS. And I'll get frames dropping into the 20s when I go in very intense combat situations. It's like it can't, handle the effects and whatnot on the Xbox One. And then also in certain zones, it doesn't matter what's going on. I'll go into a specific area and I'll get a frame rate drop. Also on my very last stream, I had a very specific moment where I had to interact with an object after completing a series of other little objectives in order to activate that object, and the game just wouldn't let me. So I was unable to continue in the story unless I reloaded to a save that was like an hour and a half before. Now, luckily, I had some very awesome people help me work through that, look up the bug online, but moments like that really just suck. They take you out of the experience. I'm sure there are more instances of bugs and glitches that I didn't mention that I have come across, but you get the general idea. It piles up after a while, all these bugs and glitches, and makes the game feel unpolished in general. Even if 10% of my experience playing the game is unpolished, I'm constantly reminded. 10%. If you're playing for an hour straight, that means 6 minutes you are being, subject to these bugs and glitches, and it's taking you out of it. And so the consensus from the community that actually wants the game to improve is that the publisher is to blame for rushing the game out. And then if BioWare had more time, they would have been able to fix some of these polishing issues. It's a hypothetical scenario. We don't know if that would actually be true if they had more time. But I believe, if you look at history, that if developers have more time, they usually squash more bugs. There's less problems, it's more polished, and on and on. But if we are going to blame EA, then that's just shitty. It really is shitty to have a game that has this amount of issues with polishing. This next group of issues has to do with your inventory and items and how those systems work together, or more accurately, how they don't work together. It's almost like you have a useless inventory screen because of the loadout. When you pick up weapons, you can't actually do anything with your inventory screen. It just shows you what you have, but you have to set your loadout at a forward station or before a mission or anything like that. You can't swap on the fly. So if we look back at the original trilogy, the original Mass Effect had a similar system to what we have right now. You could actually pick up items, you had a running inventory, you could swap things in and out on the fly in the original Mass Effect. In 2 and 3, they got rid of those RPG mechanics, made it more action focused, and you weren't actually picking up items constantly. Well, they went back to that in Andromeda. However, you can't swap your loadout on the fly. And so that begs the question, why is there even an inventory screen in the first place? If I can't swap my items on the fly, why do I need to be able to look at this? It's a total disconnect. It's like they went halfway between the first game and then the next 2 games from the original trilogy with this system. Why is there even an item limit? Why does it matter? I can't literally access these items. I can't swap them in and out. So why is it even there? And parts of the item limit system itself in its current form are ridiculous. So the 3 things that actually count as an item are weapons, armor, and weapon mods. I have to beg the question why weapon mods actually take up a slot, because if you play through the game, you find things that you like and dislike, sell things that you don't like, deconstruct them, whatever, you're still going to have a lot of mods on you, and they pile up very quickly. So the thing that's actually weighing me down the most is my mods. It doesn't make any sense. What would make sense to me is actually having mods stack. So I've got a stack of pistol mods, a stack of assault rifle mods, shotgun, sniper, on and on. And so that doesn't make sense. And furthermore, with an item limit, you'd think they'd have a chest or a stash somewhere on the Tempest where you can go back and dump the items that you do want to keep, you don't want to sell or deconstruct, so you can pick up new stuff. No, there is no place to keep your items. You are forced to sell them or deconstruct them, and that is bananas in this kind of game where you can go and loot a ton of items. It's insane. And there's another layer to this. BioWare somehow made the same mistake in Inquisition 2.5 years ago in their previous game. They didn't have a box or a stash in that game. That game, I believe you could swap stuff in and out, with your inventory and what you're actually using, but there was no stash in that game until 4.5 months later. The players of that game had to wait 4.5 months for a storage box. That was ridiculous. Are we gonna have to wait 4.5 months to get a storage box in Andromeda? I certainly hope not. This next set of issues has to do with how unintuitive the UI is. And this isn't something I actually noticed on my own. I noticed it by watching Total Biscuit's WTF is Mass Effect Andromeda. So if you haven't watched that video already, he articulates it way better than I even could ever. So link in the description below to that video. But there's several very odd decisions with the user interface that seem to have been made in favor of the aesthetic look and feel, and it's very sleek. Don't get me wrong. I think the aesthetic feel of the UI is very nice and slick, but that stuff doesn't really matter if it's not functional. You can tell that they definitely favored the look and feel over how intuitive and functional the UI is. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'll give a few examples, but there's a lot of hidden information. There's a lot of dead space that isn't being utilized how it could be. And a lot of the time, if you're trying to do something, there are just way too many buttons you have to press to find the information that you're looking for. In terms of the very general tasks that you have to complete, you can't sort those by the planet that you're on. They're just dumped in one big giant folder and you can't even sort through them. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. When you're trying to craft new items, for some reason you have to press an extra button to look at the stats and compare to what you already have, rather than just having that information right on the screen. And again, there's a ton of dead space, it's just not being utilized. On the map screen, if I want to look at a specific objective that's marked on the map, I have to scroll over it to see what that is, when in reality it should probably give me a list on the side of the screen letting me know this is all the things I can do, like it does in the planet view before you land on a planet. So it's there, but it's not on the map screen where I spend far more time. On the surface, I think that sometimes UI design critique seems a little bit picky, but in reality, when you're actually playing the game and spending a lot of times with these systems, you end up wasting time. It's frustrating, it's unintuitive, and that is just a cardinal sin, I feel like, for video games. If it's unintuitive and it's frustrating when it doesn't need to be, that is a mistake, and that is definitely something that needs to be fixed if it can be. Next up, there are some problems with dialogue, and I'm not talking about facial animations and interacting with human characters. I'm talking about what I like to call Sam spam. He spams you constantly with things that you don't need to know, and also the banter with your squad mates. So let's start with Sam. Every time you enter or leave a certain environment that is hazardous, and it's a snowy environment, might be a toxic environment, whatever it is, Sam is going to tell you, Pathfinder, you are entering or leaving this environment, watch your life support, or you're totally fine, don't worry about it. The problem is, in order to survive in these hazardous areas, the game literally needs to put areas that are safe. And so there's a lot of safe places where you're going to be entering hazardous environments and then leaving them back and forth, back and forth. The problem is that Sam spams you with this information constantly. He has to let you know that, you know what, Pathfinder, the temperatures are rising. It's going to be safe here in this cold area. However, when you leave back out again and go out into the hazardous area, it's going to tell you temperatures are lowering, watch out. It makes a lot more sense for Sam to warn me when I'm at 50% life support instead of constantly updating me when the environment changes. It's something that you have to play the game to realize, and once you realize it, it's very annoying. Also, with mining zones, I don't need to know where a mining zone is and that I could mine for resources if it tells me in the top left corner that this area is rich in resources, fair, good, depleted, whatever it may be. It's already indicated to me in the top left corner. I don't need Sam to tell me that I can mine for resources when I already have a system in place to show me that. What's even worse about this is it's tied to another issue. When Sam has to update you on the environment or the mining zones, sometimes he'll interrupt banter between your squad mates. And as you guys know, with a Mass Effect game, there's an emphasis on connecting with your squad mates, learning more about them, getting that character development. A lot of that comes in random banter situations, and Sam will interrupt them. So in terms of Sam, there needs to be either a silence button on him whenever it's not story related. I don't want to hear Sam tell me about the environment or the mining. Either that, or he needs to be reworked in such a way where he just doesn't, update you so constantly on these random bits of information that you don't really need to know. Speaking of banter, the same banter bug that was in Dragon Age Inquisition is back in Andromeda, and apparently BioWare never truly fixed that issue in Inquisition, which I do have a problem with. But there seem to be very arbitrary triggers for banter. It's hard to really tell when something is supposed to be said, if it's a certain area or if it's completely random. I'm not sure how it works in Mass Effect Andromeda, but certain combos of squad mates do work better than others. Some of them are more talkative, and I don't think that's actually, on purpose. I think that's just a symptom of the problem. Again, I'm not a game designer. I don't know how complex these systems are, but I don't understand how they knew it was a problem in the original game and still had it in the following game 2.5 years later. Why was this not solved? It just doesn't make sense, and it's very frustrating from the player's perspective. My final group of issues I'm going to touch on in this video have to do with multiplayer, and I realize that probably the majority of the Mass Effect audience doesn't play the multiplayer mode. I realize it's more of a story-focused game, but multiplayer does exist and there are issues, and I do play it myself. So there are a random laundry list of issues, maybe connected, maybe not, I'm not really sure, but I'm just going to go down the things that I have encountered. So sometimes only the host can complete objectives. In certain rounds, you have to complete certain objectives, hold a button, whatever it may be. There's a specific objective which has you disarming devices. If you are not the host, sometimes the game does not let you complete that, which is really a problem. And you don't really know who the host is unless you set up the game yourself. Matchmaking, sometimes you don't really know if you got in the middle of a game, on and on. So the problem is, if only one player can complete the objective when all of them should be able to, I don't even have to explain that. That is an issue. There is a bug where you get less credits if there's less than 4 people in your squad. That's not on purpose. That is a bug. And so that's an issue because sometimes you can't even control if the game match makes you with enough people. Sometimes you have to just start a mission and then hope that more people get into the match by the end of it. Sometimes matchmaking flat out doesn't work. It doesn't find you a game. It doesn't matter how good or bad your internet is. It just won't work. It requires a full reset of the game to start working again. There's some small little issues with the nameplates resetting. You can earn nameplates by completing challenges. If I set that, if I reset the game and come back and play another day, it's not going to be there. I have to put it back on. That's just kind of annoying. There's specific issues with different abilities and different classes. For example, the stealth grid ability doesn't seem to work on your player, but it's an AoE ability. It works on other players, just not you. That doesn't make any sense. The kineticist has a specific ability called Ascension that doesn't work half of the time. It's very sporadic. There is an overall sound issue, and people believe that this is triggered by biotic explosions or other kind of power combos where the sound cuts out and then sometimes you don't have sound for the rest of your match for no reason whatsoever. That's definitely something that takes you out of the experience. And I also see other balancing complaints from the community, like all of the weapons outside of snipers feel really weak, and obviously that falls under balancing, and they couldn't know because they didn't have enough testing and all stuff like that. Things we expect with multiplayer kind of modes, but a lot of these are polishing issues. They are glitches and things that shouldn't be happening. They're not intentional. So those were the biggest criticisms that I have encountered in my experience. Some people will have a better experience than others because of the random nature, the arbitrary nature of why these glitches trigger, why they happen. That's kind of the nature of these problems. And so I'd love to hear from you guys in the comment section below. What are your biggest issues with Andromeda so far? And again, we're trying to take this from a place of we want the game to improve, not from a this is why the game is trash, this is why I'm able to ignore the positive things about the game only to further my outrage opinion kind of perspective. If you enjoy this video, feel free to click that like button. I'd really appreciate it. And also don't forget to subscribe for more Andromeda tips and tricks, guides, commentary, and my 100% completion streamed playthrough returning very soon. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.